All right, guys, welcome in. We'll let folks continue to join in. Paul, feel free to just keep letting folks in as they come. But we'll go ahead and get started here a few minutes past the hour. So thank you all for taking time out of your Thursday and St. Patrick's Day to be with us tonight. We have a great event lined up for you. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Chris Goodnow. I'm the VP of Programming for AMA Boston. I'll be your host tonight, joined by our guest speaker, Peter, who you see here on the screen. And before we dive in, just wanted to go over a few housekeeping things with everyone and agenda topics as well. So real quick, just kind of a rundown of our event tonight. We're going to be talking about the topic of restoring trust in social media with Peter. He's going to be leading that conversation. We'll leave some time afterwards for audience questions and discussion. And then at the end of the event, we'll break up into breakout sessions into groups to discuss and to network a little bit. Just a few housekeeping items here. Please keep your mics muted unless we call on you to speak. Just want to avoid as much audio disruption as possible. If you do have any questions, as I mentioned, feel free to add those into the chat. We'll be fielding those throughout the conversation, or you can just save them for the question portion of the event. The event is being recorded, so we'll get this out to everybody via email that signed up in the next few days, so be on the lookout for that. And also, if you want to take any pictures, put any posts on social media, we'd love to see your stuff. Just make sure you use the hashtag AMA Boston so that we can find and engage with your post. A little bit about who we are at AMA Boston. I know a few of you noted in this chat that this is your first event with us, so thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate you joining us. We are the networking educational hub for marketers in the New England region, but AMA is a national association, so we have chapters all across the country as well, but we focus and work with the New England area marketers. So that's a little bit about us. If you're interested in joining and getting involved, we have a lot of volunteer opportunities across all of our teams, our content marketing team, programming, sponsorship, email marketing, all of our teams. So if you're interested in maybe learning a new skill or volunteering on one of those teams, you can check it out on our website, all of our teams that we have positions open for, or feel free to connect with myself or any of the board members on the call tonight. They'll be introducing themselves in the chat to learn a little bit more about that. Maybe you're considering getting involved as a member and joining our chapter. We have a lot of different pricing tiers you can see here, but we have a lot of really great member benefits, things like member-only events. We're going to be having our first one of the year in the spring. We also offer a lot of really great resources on our website to our members. So a lot of really great member benefits. Again, if you're interested in learning a little bit more about that, just connect with myself or any of the board members that you'll see on the call tonight. Real quick, some of our upcoming events. Our next event is 2 weeks from today, March 31st from 7 to 8 p.m. on NFTs. We're going to be talking with our guest speakers that you see here, Jen and Lee, kind of about what are NFTs, why are they so popular, how are companies and brands using them in their marketing. Also, all attendees for that event will be receiving a customized AMA Boston NFT, which is pretty cool. So we're going to be giving that out to everyone that attends. So feel free to sign up. I'll add the link in the chat to that. It's a free event, it's virtual, just a little bit of a time change, 7 to 8 instead of 6 to 7 Eastern as this event is. So I'll add the link to that to sign up if anyone's interested and to learn more about that event in just a bit. And without further ado, wanted to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Peter Pradramu, the CEO and President of Boston Digital. Peter, welcome in. Thanks so much for being here with us.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks for having me. Nice to meet you all, and thank you. You got my name exactly right, so that's awesome. A lot of people don't. So.
And I forgot to ask you how to pronounce it at the beginning of this call, so there we go. It worked out.
Perfect.
Awesome. Well, we have a great topic to talk about tonight. Before we jump in, I wanted to just give you the mic, Peter, just to tell the audience a little bit about yourself, your background, and kind of how you got to where you are today.
Sure, love to. So I began my career in the mid-1980s working in technology PR at a time when we used to send press releases and call people 3 days later to see if they got them and then try to get coverage in magazines like Computer World. And later on became a partner in an advertising agency running the PR practice, and then went to work for a leading PR firm at the time called Weber Group, which later became Weber Shandwick. I left there in 2003 with the CEO and founder and helped to form a company called Racepoint Group. And I spent 15 years at Racepoint Group and helped build it into something called Racepoint Global, which I later became CEO of for several years. And then I moved into digital marketing about 3 years ago. I joined the advisory board at Boston Digital, sort of became fast friends with the founder. He invited me on board, and I have been helping to run the company ever since. And what that vantage point has given me is a huge opportunity to sort of see the evolution of media and the evolution of trust over the last 35 or 40 years. And what unfortunately has been a continued erosion of trust in virtually every institution. And at a meta level, as we all know, unfortunately, that's led to a lot of polarization in the country, not just politically, but I think socially and in many, many other ways. And for the longest time, when I was in PR, we would argue that, earned media was trusted media. It was free. We pitched. There was a certain degree of purity to it. Advertising was fine, but it was paid for. And that was meant to create, huge visibility, but PR would sort of bring the story home. And when the internet began to really take off in 1998, 1999, we saw this as an awesome opportunity to really start to democratize access to information. And in fact, we spent a lot of time at Weber Group and Weber Shandwick talking about the notion of democratization of media and the opportunity that it would provide. By 2009, I was working in Washington, and I used to stand up and joke to my public policy clients that social media and digital media had become phenomenal tools for influence in Washington, but I feared what might happen to democracy as a result of it, because I knew the kinds of things that we were doing in terms of micro-targeting and the ability to sort of really, really focus a message to a subsegment of people and influence behavior. And I would say it half jokingly, never really thinking much about it. But obviously, and it's not that I'm particularly perceptive, but obviously, we were moving into a time where you could trust media less and less. As a result of that, I've become very much a student of media over these years and really want to try to figure out a way to solve that notion of mistrust and see if there's a way to restore it. And I think about it from the perspectives of, technology. Can blockchain be used as a tool for authentication so that we have better, better source material and more trust in it? Are there ways to restore the public trust more generally? And I'm not sure what the answer is. I wrote the manuscript to a book over the last couple of years that talks about the restoration of trust in media and the role that technology companies in particular can play in that. But I think there's a long way to go from here to there. Having said that, I think we as marketers and as people who are influencing behavior on a day in and day out basis are concerned. There's an enormous opportunity for us to do social good and hopefully help to restore trust in social media and more broadly in society. And, I'd like to spend the rest of my career focusing in part on that mission.
Awesome. Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I'm excited. I think the topic of restoring trust in social, it's an interesting one, especially in today's world where every company really has to have a presence on social, right? So with that being said, social media can feel overwhelming and it can feel kind of like an overload of information and content being shared every minute of every day, really. So as marketers, how do we break through the clutter so that our brands not only are being seen by the right audiences, but they're also being positioned so that we're being seen as a brand that our audiences can trust?
Yeah, it's a great question. So you might be surprised to learn, some of you won't be surprised to learn, that the institutions that are most trusted now by key publics are corporations. And it's kind of ironic because a lot of media will talk about the fact that corporations are, price gouging or, putting people out of business or taking jobs, all the things that we know and understand. But if you look at how other institutions are perceived, corporations actually have a greater degree of trust than the government, than the church, and other institutions do. And I see that as an enormous opportunity. And I was asked to come into one of the three major wireless carriers a couple of years ago and help them with government relations, and talk to them about how they could start to create better relationships through public affairs and through government affairs, not only with their customers, but with people, out in the hinterlands who were concerned about issues like access to broadband or healthcare in their neighborhood. And we started pulling data for that. I had believed we would find that corporations were more trusted just based on the anecdotal conversations that I had been having, and found that to be true. They were shocked by that. But what I said to them is, you have an enormous opportunity here if you spend time leveraging that trust around the key issues that people care about specific to them and talking about how you can help them. So our job at that point becomes influencing internal behaviors across the organization as much as it does communications and social media. And if you are given the seat at the table to do that, Chris, I know you're in strategy consulting. Oftentimes people in strategy consulting are afforded that opportunity much more readily than people from communications are, because you're talking to executives in a different part of the organization. But if you can secure a seat at that table, there's a huge opportunity to start to influence that conversation and to influence that behavior and illustrate the pull through from an economic and brand perspective. I think the other thing is to really tie back to issues that people care about. And it sounds cliche, yet so few organizations are doing it in a meaningful way. I think, there are issues that we all latch on to, but how sincere we are in the expression of that and how much we actually live those values in the work that we do is probably variable across organizations. From my perspective, we just published a study on ESG and the role of sustainability in society, and the attitudes that people have across multiple generations with respect to that, and what that means to them from a brand loyalty perspective. And the survey results were really, really interesting. Luxury goods scored incredibly poorly, which kind of didn't surprise me, because it's like a lot of people look at that from a populist perspective. If I can't afford it, they must not be doing good. But the two sectors that scored highest were technology and energy companies. So if you think about that, it's really counterintuitive, particularly energy companies, given that, we're looking at $4.50 gas, $106 a barrel cost of oil. But those organizations have done a good job of insinuating themselves into the conversation around the future of green energy and how they intend to reinvent themselves and be carbon neutral by a certain point in time. Technology companies stunned me, if only because I think big tech, or what's being framed as big tech, has such a negative reputation at this point. And yet, I think, and I personally do believe this, the future is bright if we rely on innovation and technology to help solve these problems, and probably is one of our best pathways forward to the sustainable future. So the ability to tie your brand to those key issues, again, sounds obvious and cliche, but the behavior that exists across the organization in a time where CMOs, still have very short lifespans, where CTOs are fighting the marketing department to take over digital, where CEOs are demanding that you show data to illustrate the value of every penny spent. How are you going to spend time on those issues in a meaningful way? And making that happen is essential.
Yeah, and the showing data and ROI to leadership teams is something we'll get to in a little bit, because that's an interesting piece we talked about, Peter. Before we do, real quick, I wanted to talk about strategies for marketers. I think with so many different social media platforms that exist today, like TikTok's one that's exploded in the past year and a half. LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, so many of these, YouTube, so many that just can feel overwhelming and almost impossible, I think, for even smaller brands and companies to have a consistent voice and message on that resonates with their audience. So in your experience, do you find that brands see a better ROI by investing their time and money into having a brand presence on all of those platforms, as many as they possibly can? Or do you think it's a better approach for brands to identify a niche group of those social platforms to develop a marketing strategy that elevates their presence on those channels? I think it's probably a little bit different for B2B and B2C. So if you have thoughts on both of those groups, would welcome that as well.
I do, and I think it's a little bit of both for both. So let me start with paid, paid digital media and paid social. If my media planners were here, they would tell you focus on Facebook and Google, period. 90% of transactions occur because people are seeing things in paid media, and that's the way to influence behavior and move people toward the purchase or the base of the purchase funnel. And it's true. I can't argue with that data. And yet, coming out of public relations and thinking about the impact that we need to continue to make from a brand perspective, what I would say is you have to really have a good, solid social media strategy that allows you to create conversations that talk about more than transactions. I spent the last 20 years saying, or 15 since social media became really dominant, that you probably have about the attention span for 2 to 3 social channels. Most of us are on either Facebook and LinkedIn, or Facebook and Twitter, or LinkedIn and Twitter, or Instagram and one of the microblogging. It's very, very hard to live your life across multiple platforms. You've got all these apps on your phone, and you click open 1 or 2 of them. And now you've got new microblogging properties coming online, looking to micro segment even more and having really, really hard times getting anybody to sign up for them, mainly because, and I'll just be tangential for a minute, I think people lie a little bit about their behavior. They say they want to go someplace where everybody is going to think the same as them. And yet I think in Twitter's case, people actually still like staying in that venue and arguing with each other. I think the notion of the public fight is fun for a lot of people, whether they know it or not. So ultimately, from a spend perspective, what I'm looking at, whether it's B2B or B2C, well, let me start with B2B. With B2B, what I'm looking for is the 8 or 10 most prolific influencers in a particular category who are having the loudest and most influential conversations about a topic at any point in time. And that's going to vary from week to week. There's going to be some like Kara Swisher and Walt Mossberg in technology who are constantly going to be voices, but there are going to be people coming in and out of that dialogue. We're going to have influence one week and maybe not so much the next week. If you can find those conversations, and there are many, many tools for doing it. I actually helped build a software tool that did it in my last company, but there are certainly commercial products you can do that with. If you can find those most prolific conversations and figure out a way to launch into those conversations and become a meaningful part of that, you can leverage the distributed influence of those very high profile, but also highly credible influencers in order to move your brand and your product forward. And in technology, where the bulk of selling still occurs through public relations as a key marketing component, that becomes even more important. It's a little bit harder with consumer, to your point. It is very much about video these days. TikTok is eclipsing virtually everything. And I think, if you look at the behaviors of kids in the 15 to 20, really younger, I look at my niece who started when she was probably 10 years old. She's about 16 now, making videos and putting them up. They're being trained in real time to move to TikTok, and that's where they're going to do their work. And it's hard to catch up. You're Facebook and you've got massive scale, and yet your competitive technology cannot catch up. There was a brilliant question after Facebook put out its last earnings. The question on CNBC was, is Facebook the new Yahoo? And I'm not ready to say that yet. It took Pan Am 50 years of being non-profitable to die. Facebook will outlive me just on the strength of there being so many accounts that have been opened for people who are alive and dead. But you start to see an erosion and an opportunity for other technologies to rise up. And the lack of innovation in these larger organizations makes it harder and harder for them to compete. So that's a lot I just threw out there and probably went down 6 different paths. Ultimately, I'd sum it up as say, find 2 or 3 channels, stick with the ones that are well known, spend your advertising dollar, through Google search and still Facebook on scale, Instagram if it's highly visual and consumer driven in certain instances. And don't believe everything you hear about upstart technologies that are going to displace them until they get to be the size of TikTok.
Yeah, I think it makes good sense. And I think a lot of us probably have a good idea of what channels make sense for our business and where our consumers live. But I think to your point, focusing on that niche group of them, not only just to have a regular cadence of what you're posting and getting your message out, but to engage with your audience and to comment and to like and to share and to have conversations and be part of that dialogue on those social channels is really important too. So I think it's a great point. Shifting gears a little bit, I think you kind of touched on paid search. And I think one thing we talked about in our initial call, Peter, was how you're seeing some brands focus so heavily on paid search and advertising that the creative side of things and authenticity is getting lost in that process. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think you had some really interesting points on that topic.
Yeah, absolutely. I like to think of myself as being a provocateur. You can make your own judgments on that. But quietly when I'm at home at night thinking about, I'd like to be a thought leader. I do kind of think about these things. And the issue as I see it today is we are so over-indexed on metrics and data science that we've done it at the expense of the brand. And we've bought in entirely to what Amazon is selling us as providers of products, which is, get price focused, look at the granular data of the pull-through and how the campaign is working and measure every result based on that. So I was sitting with some of the analysts at Forrester before the pandemic, and I said, my view, for what it's worth, thinking they were just going to say, you don't know what you're talking about, is that the next investment in marketing will be back toward brilliant creative as a means of starting to reestablish the brand presence on the internet. And they were like, hey, that's actually something we agree with. We're actually thinking about starting a practice on that because we tend to agree with this notion that we have become over-indexed on data. Now, as an agency person, I've got to provide data. We've got to have data scientists. We've got to illustrate the pull-through. But the conversations that I find us in oftentimes they're tough, not just for us, but for our clients. It's emails from CFOs who are basically saying, I need to see dollar for dollar pull through before I'm going to put any budget to this. So you're almost having to justify a future forward argument that you can't possibly have all the data on yet in order to validate that. And it doesn't take into account that, let's say a campaign I do takes you 95% of the base of the funnel. There is still a series of variables in the last 5%, including the behavior of your sales force, the use of tools, your own internal marketing campaigns. Somebody getting a HubSpot email saying, call this place that downloaded a piece of content, and a human not doing that. And so, nobody wants to hear that those variables exist, and yet they do. I think the other part of it is this. With respect to data. I find organizations often don't know how to ask for it. So I was working with a huge healthcare company on the West Coast. This was several years ago. And I got a text from their head of digital marketing. He's like, we have an assignment. I'm like, that's awesome. What do you got? Bring it on. He said, we're thinking, because of the Affordable Care Act, of moving into other states. That's awesome. And we're feeding data up to our CEO. We give him 65 pages of data every day, and he doesn't know what to do with it. And I'm thinking to myself, I have an attention span like that, right? You give me 65 pages of data, I'm going to be like, give me the answers on what, So I said, well, what's the assignment? He said, we need to know the 5 most important metrics we should be sharing with him every morning. To me, that's an enormous opportunity. On the one hand, you're like, okay, what's the needle in the haystack? On the other hand, you are now called into a discussion that allows you to define the value of data and metrics in a meaningful business pull-through that is provable, and to build the system for it. So we took a step back and said, let's evaluate the conversations that are occurring in digital media every morning, in social media every morning. Let's evaluate the ones that are pro or con. Let's find our key supporters in these markets, and then let's use those influence channels to start to affect behavior in those markets. And what we're going to feed you every day is conversation data, actionable insights, and your progress against those insights. And that became a very, very high impact program, which we were able to replicate across other healthcare systems. And so I'm always looking for the answer that can get us to something you can take to your CMO or your CEO that actually does something good and is provable, as opposed to handing you a stack that's, you know, going to hold a door open.
Yeah, you made an interesting point. This bleeds into my next question nicely, because I think, you know, what you just mentioned is CEOs and leadership teams and C-suite executives, they don't care about a 65-page report and the data and the numbers, right? They want to see visualizations. What are the 5 most important things? What's going to be, you know, driving growth for our company? So, but at the same time, I think especially now more than ever, considering everything you've just mentioned too about authenticity and being creative with your marketing efforts, it's important for marketers and companies to slow down when creating content and creating things that are going to resonate to win that trust of their audience. So how do you win over the case when you're making that case to your leadership team that are interested in seeing the data, that, you know, maybe we're not going to have every day the 5 most important data points, maybe not even every week or every month, but maybe every quarter, whatever time, you know, cadence it is that you're reporting to them? How do you make the case that this is the best long-term strategy for our brand to grow in the long run?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's going to sound like another obvious cliche, and yet it's not. You know, I was chatting with somebody today who does sales training, and, you know, she sort of counts as the same thing. You know, you're from the strategy consulting business. Your business, I don't know about yours specifically, but your category has a straight pathway to the CEO's office. There's an innate sense of understanding on why they need that category in their organization and how it's going to influence key business outcomes. Now, I used to be inside of a strategy consulting firm, and I love the work. But what's fascinating to me is I'd be out there talking about data and engagement from a marketing and PR perspective, and the founder of this firm would be talking about it from a business analytics perspective. We were invited to Indonesia to help a presidential candidate figure out how to use social in his election strategy. Here's a quick sidebar. I came up with this theory of the case that we should cross-reference digital engagement with broadcast and figure out how to run his advertising relative to what was going on in his social channels at any given point in time. And I said to him, how much media do you own? He goes, oh, I own all of it. And I'm like, oh, you bought time on every station? He goes, no, I bought the TV stations. I was like, oh, okay, well, that's good. You really don't need me. You can just flood the market. But no, I sat there and I gave him like this really detailed plan. And then the guy from the parent company stood up, the chairman of that company, and he later told me, he said, that was a brilliant plan. I really liked it. I said, you're blowing smoke, but thank you. I appreciate it. He put up a dot plot, and he walked them through how this dot plot was going to work for a campaign, presidential campaign. And we go out later that night, and we're drinking wine, and he's smoking his American spirits. And I said, where'd you get that slide? He goes, oh, we made that one up in 1973. Replicable asset. You know, he was able to apply it to the business. And that's how he kept using it over and over again. And as communicators and marketers, we need that kind of credibility, that kind of repeatability, that ability to illustrate that the data that we are providing has real business impact, but leavening it with enough truth telling that we're not trapping ourselves in the process, right? Because if you're a CMO, you know what the average life cycle is. And if you're an agency, you know what the average life cycle is. And that doesn't enable us enough time to help each other and actually get it done. So I think setting the foundation at the executive level, truthfully from the outset, and investing in each other winds up providing, you know, the best digital marketing and social marketing results. I think the last thing I would say is this. You need to be very judicious in how you engage, along with being authentic. There was a It's an agency called the Martin Agency, and a lot of you probably saw this story. The Martin Agency pitched to a crypto company for a Super Bowl ad. CEO of the crypto company posted on Twitter day after the Super Bowl, we interviewed a bunch of agencies and none of them had any good ideas. So we came up with our own concept. The CEO of the Martin Agency, and I give her applause for this, said, she lit him up. She set fire to the guy on Twitter. She's like, no, you stole our idea. We gave that to you. And it led to an enormously interesting back and forth. I think, there needs to be an investment in each other. And it's not about who had the best idea in the moment, because in the end, we're all collaborating with each other. So that's my little kumbaya ending.
Yeah, that was great, Peter. Thanks for sharing. I think we're a little bit over, so wanted to just see if anybody had any questions for Peter, any thoughts on the topic, anything that they wanted to share. I didn't see any notes in the chat, so if anybody wanted to come off mute or anything, feel free to do so. Bob, yes.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. Peter, excellent. A lot of great information and insight you shared with us tonight. Thanks so much for being here, and I enjoyed listening to you. I'm going to throw a question at you that's a complete, if it's okay with you, change a topic, more regarding leadership and corporate culture, because you've been a very high-ranking executive most of your career, of course, and at Boston Digital, I'm curious. There's been a lot of changes in the workplace in terms of some working from home and some hybrid, if you will, a little bit at home, a little bit in the office. I'm curious how Boston Digital has pivoted during the pandemic, what it was like for all of you, and what it's like now, and how you've led the team through everything.
Sure, appreciate that. And thanks for having me. I really enjoyed speaking a little bit tonight. It's funny, in the first year, I think I was just talking with somebody about this. We had a little St. Patrick's Day get together as I was on the way out of the office tonight. The first year, everybody really pulled together, and I think it was almost easier. And clients were enormously forgiving, so that made it easier as well. Clients remained forgiving. What you started to get in the second year was we all started to see employees moving in and out of organizations, younger people in particular getting these great offers. So you're replacing people and you're onboarding new talent remotely. And that's hard. And I found that hard. And so, we made a decision back in September. We were going to start to come in 2 days a week and slowly filter people in. And then came, Delta got worse, and then Omicron came, and, we stepped back. We made a decision about a month ago that yesterday would be our first day back in the office. We also made a decision that it would be permanently a hybrid model. Now I say permanently, who knows, a year from now, it could be that things change. But our best hope is to remain a hybrid model. And what we're doing is 3 days in with a set of choices on which days those are, in order to foster more collaboration and more physical presence with each other in pods, so that you can sort of start to get that sense of family again. I mean, an organization like ours, 45 people, it is really, you got to create a sense of family. And then Fridays are sort of a day where folks are invited to work at home, and then pick one other day to work at home. But, we've also got to be flexible. I had one employee walk up to me today and say, I've got young children, and they're not vaxxed yet, and because they're not eligible. And, this is a little rough for me. And I said, well, you should not come in. You should stay at home until you're ready. So, we have to take it individually. I think, there's also the competitive part of it. Our competition, all of our competition in every business, unless you're like a New York investment bank these days, is saying, we're going partly remote. And I think this is the world we're going to live in for a long, long time. So.
Thanks, Peter. Great answer.
Sure, my pleasure.
We have another question in the chat from Brian. He's asking, how do you see social audio being added to brands' marketing mix with an emphasis on ROI as platforms increase the amount of data?
How do I see social audio being added to brands' marketing mix? That's a good question. You know, and I'm not sure I have a great answer. You know, I think there's an opportunity to create a set of metrics, I think, that start to show ROI based on what, you know, on social audio, as opposed to the mistakes I think we've made in the past with all of social and digital media, which is porting over traditional metrics and applying them to social and digital venues. Because I think we've created a trap for ourselves, and we're not, as a result, I think, A, we don't measure as well as we could. B, we're not doing things like persona development as well as we could. I know this is not a great answer. I'm not sure I have a great answer, but that is sort of how I would see it. I think we just need to really create our own metrics.
Great. Anyone else had any questions, thoughts, wanted to share? Brett, you just shared a great article in the chat as well, so thanks for sharing that too. Awesome.
Appreciate this. If anyone's interested, I'm happy to send a link to our ESG study. Our marketing people did a smart thing. They gamified it, which makes it more fun. So happy to send it along.
Yeah, absolutely. We can even share that in the follow-up as well when we send the recording around. So we'll get that out to everyone because I think that would be really interesting data to look at. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate you being here. This was a great discussion, and thanks so much for coming tonight.